Now tell me, is this one of those I'm not racist but examples? Kevin Parker, a Dubbo councillor, has been suspended from his job at the Bank of Queensland after emailing his colleagues a racist joke that he found on Facebook. We haven't seen the email, but we know it made fun of Indigenous Australians, which incidentally is a group that makes up 20% of the population of Dubbo. Here's Councillor Parker admitting his error.
I do admit that I did send it on, and there was certainly no malice meant. I'm not a racist person. I've been in the banking game for a long, long time. I've approved loans for Aboriginal people. I've employed Aboriginal people. If I was a racist, I wouldn't do any of those things.
What do you think of that? Does it kind of sound like he's thinking that's a storm in a teacup? And what about you? Have you ever kind of flicked on those emails yourself? I mean, what happens, or what would happen if one came into your in-tray this afternoon? What would you do? Well, Dvir Abramovich is the chair of the Anti-Defamation Commission, and he spends a fair bit of his time pushing back against this sort of behaviour. And Dvir joins us now. Good afternoon, and thanks for coming on our show.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
The councillor says he's not being racist. Is he?
Well, I always find it odd that when stereotypes, insensitive remarks, smears, and insulting and degrading views about Indigenous Australians bubble to the surface, either online or in conversation, those who traffic in those kinds of bigoted attitudes ask us for a free pass by saying I'm not a racist, or some of my best friends are, as if that sort of grants them some kind of cover to give voice to racist and xenophobic views. Adults have to own what they say and what they do. And, to say it's not a big deal or we didn't mean to hurt anyone just doesn't fly. Look, it goes without saying that when I heard about what happened, I was appalled and outraged. But I'm not surprised, because this latest incident is a reminder of the enduring power of these kinds of outrageous and unacceptable beliefs that still permeate and are commonplace in our culture. And it's also a reminder that we have a big job in building and promoting a respectful and inclusive Australia, and that particular job is not done.
Dvir, myself and many people who are listening to this program, we've been the butt of jokes over the years. We might have put on a couple of pounds over Christmas, or we've dropped a catch at cricket or whatever, and people have taken the mickey out of us. But what's it like to suffer racial slurs and for your entire life? Now, you've got a fancy surname with far too many consonants in it. Have you ever been the subject of the kinds of remarks that we're talking about today?
I have, and I think that negative, limiting, and degrading stereotypes, they impact not just how individuals and communities perceive themselves, but it's also how others see them as well. And we know that when racist attitudes are expressed in public or through social media or on emails, and they're not condemned, and especially when it comes from people in leadership positions, be it councillors or elected representatives, it gives a green light to those on the fringe to keep spouting it and acting on it. And we also have to remember that at the core of every racially and religiously motivated violence are words, our incitement, our radicalization. My friend Abe Foxman always says that Auschwitz, where more than 1.5 million people were gassed and murdered, did not begin with the bricks and mortar of that concentration camps. It began with words that dehumanized Jews. So we have to remember that words are bullets, and that they can have a terrifying consequence on our society. And the words that we use have consequences, whether they're used in our living rooms or whether they're in emails or in the pub. And lastly, when you have those kinds of incidents, when you have the trafficking and the peddling of those kinds of attitudes, they directly impact on our abilities to sustain an Australia that ensures dignity and equality for all.
What's interesting here is that Mr. Parker is being pilloried. Now, I don't know Kevin Parker, never met him, but he might be a good bloke who's made a bad mistake. And the scary part of this, Dvir, I wonder, is how many, if we were to go through the inboxes of Australians at random, there'd be quite a few people who could get caught in a scandal like this. Do you reckon?
I do. Our indigenous brothers and sisters have been a frequent target of degrading and demeaning stereotypes, of scapegoating, of smears and insults that have contributed to a culture and a climate of contempt towards, our First Nation people. So maybe we need to use, this interview and this incident. All good people need to use it as a teachable moment. Maybe we need to reflect on the values and the principles that guide us, how we treat others, how we think of others, but more importantly, to set an example for young people, for our children, for our brothers and sisters, for our nephews and nieces. What does it mean to be a responsible and upstanding citizen? Because I can tell you one thing, bigotry against anybody, whether it is Indigenous Australians or Muslims or Asians, is not who we are as a people. And over the last few years, we, especially at the Anti-Defamation Commission, we've seen an unbelievable spike in intolerance in this country, from dog whistles to heartbreaking bullying, name-calling, but also a surge in anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, and anti-Semitic sentiments. So we have to deal with this explosion of scapegoating and this kind of stereotype that are being peddled. We're seeing it also in the wake of the coronavirus outbreak, especially on the Asian community. So,
there was a case where a patient refused to be seen by a doctor of Asian heritage in a Melbourne hospital just yesterday.
Well, Dr. Martin Luther King often spoke about this concept of the beloved community. Well, what does that mean? It means that it's a place where diversity is celebrated, but I think more importantly, where being different is not a liability, it's a cause for celebration. And I think that's the point, that when we stand up for the Asian community or for the indigenous community, for any minority, we're not just fighting for them, we're fighting for you and for me. Because when we fight hatred against anybody, immigrants or African Australians, we are fighting for ourselves, because ultimately the racists and the bigots and the neo-Nazis will target everybody. So we all have a responsibility. And I often say that when you hear a bigoted joke, or when you get an email like this councillor got, you need to speak up. When you see a stereotype shared on Facebook, you need to call it out. Or when you hear a comment at the dinner table, you have to model for our children and teach them with action, not just words, that it's not permissible to denigrate others because of how they look or how they pray or where they're from or who they love. So then we can actually say Australia is a multicultural place where everybody can thrive and everybody is treated fairly.
Yeah. I've just received an interesting comment, thanks to Peter at Belmont, who says, "Good afternoon, read the racist comments. This guy had to have a racist predisposition to enjoy that joke enough to share it with others." It is a bit of a giveaway, isn't it?
Of course it is. Of course it is, because I think anybody who is led and guided by the moral compass would be absolutely repulsed by anything which approximates to racism or bigotry or intolerance. And we often talk about it at the Anti-Defamation Commission about the pyramid of hate, because it's a helpful way to think about racism. And at the layer of the bottom of this pyramid is what we saw today. It's the kind of, the prevalent biases that persist, the stereotypes, the belittling jokes, the non-inclusive languages. But if you leave those kinds of simple stereotypes about a group unchallenged, it can easily grow into sustained feelings. And then, of course, to more extreme levels, which, at the end, ends up with bias-motivated violence. So we have to take this very seriously. This is about the future of our nation, who we want to be as a people. Do we want to be a place where anybody who is different is afraid to walk the streets, or do we want to be a place where everybody feels safe and secure?
I like the expression you used earlier in this interview about a free card. I think our responsibility now is to not give anyone a free card under any circumstances.
I agree, and we have a big job ahead of us. It's a hard caper, building a society of tolerance. But I believe that, look, I don't know what is in the heart of that counselor, but he has to own his behavior. Otherwise, we are giving, as I said before, a free pass and a cover to all the racists. And we are finding ourselves now in a moral moment in this country, where the garden of our democracy is being infected by the weeds of intolerance. And unless we act now and we do it in a decisive, meaningful way, I'm afraid of where we might end up.
Dvir, lovely to talk to you today. Thanks for coming on and sharing that insight with us.
Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Dvir Abramovich, who's the chair of the Anti-Defamation Commission, spends a fair bit of his time pushing back against racist behaviour.